start by telling you about something that happened about a month ago, a month before, or a little more than a month ago. It was a month before Christmas, and Melissa was heading out of town on a conference retreat. This was before Kevin and Carissa and their baby Quinn lived with us, and so it was going to be just me by myself in the house for a couple days. And Melissa wanted to make sure that I survived until she got back, and so she put the house in careful order, and she smashed all the food she could into the fridge, and she put away all the sharp, dangerous objects in our house so that I'd be okay while she was gone without supervision. And it was important. The first day she was gone, and things went pretty well. Things were going pretty well. I grabbed my lunch out of the fridge, and as I did, I noticed just one little thing. There was a bit of a puddle on the middle shelf. And so being the good husband, she'd done all this work, I thought I'd do some work too. And so I just kind of took my hand and wiped the puddle off the shelf and closed the fridge. And some of you think that's perfectly acceptable, and the rest of you are female. So I thought it was fine, but I was being helpful, so I wiped it off the shelf, and I closed the fridge and didn't think anything about it and until I came back later that night, and I kind of opened the fridge, and this time for dinner, I noticed that there was a bit of an aroma. There was a little bit of a stink, but I was kind of in full-on bachelor mode, and I'm not going to point fingers because it might have been me, and so I just kind of shut the fridge, and not a big deal, right? Until the next morning. And in the morning I wake up and I open it and there's definitely something smelling wrong in here. But I hadn't had my coffee yet, and so I thought, I'll close the door and I'll get it at lunch. And so lunch comes, and for the first time in 2.5 days, I actually take a serious look inside the fridge. And there's definitely a smell, and I look down and there's definitely a puddle starting to form under the meat drawer. The very bottom of our fridge, and I pulled that out to see what we're looking at, and I notice that in this depression at the bottom of our fridge, there's a big puddle. And coming down to the puddle, or leading up from the puddle, there's a line of drips going up the side of our fridge, and it goes past the bottom shelf, and past the middle shelf, all the way up to the top. Great. And so I do a sniff test, and this is definitely the source of the problem, and I start to look out to find the culprit. And I find, after I'm moving stuff around and trying to figure out what's causing the smell, what's causing the leak, I found in the very top left of the fridge, way in the back, there's this cardboard carton that was supposed to hold a gallon of coconut milk. And it looked like someone, probably me, had pushed things a little bit too hard to get them back in the fridge, hadn't really paid attention, and had just smashed this a little bit too much, maybe about 2.5 days ago. And so in the process, I'd crinkled just the back corner of this carton. And it was fine, it shouldn't have been a problem, except a little tiny pinprick-sized hole pops up in the back of this carton. And little by little, drip by drip by drip, the contents, all 1 gallon of coconut milk, had seeped out of the back of the carton and surreptitiously slithered down the side of our fridge. And now they were congealed in a perfectly gallon-sized puddle at the bottom of our fridge that had the consistency and the sight and appearance of human mucus. And so, yeah, it was. And so, being the good husband that I was, I shut the fridge and left it for Melissa. I did not do that. I spent the rest of my lunch break on my hands and knees, literally up to my elbows in gross, congealed, rancid coconut milk, as I got to take a plastic cup and bail out a gallon worth of coconut milk and pour it in a bucket and then pour that down the sink again and again and again. And it was disgusting. It was so disgusting I didn't even take a picture to share, but it grossed me out. And here's why we're talking about it. Because all of this grossness came because something as small, as insignificant, as minute, as a really slow leak coming out of the back of a really big carton. And the thing is, we have slow leaks in our lives too. Sometimes they're going to come in the back of your fridge. But sometimes we have slow leaks that happen in other areas. Sometimes we get slow leaks in our finances. And most people don't get into financial stress or hard financial situations because of one really bad purchase. Most of the time, it's a bad habit of maybe buying a little more than we can afford and charging it on the credit card. and then watching as the slow leak of interest payments and service fees takes us farther and farther away from financial health. Sometimes we run into slow leaks with our physical health. And it's not something catastrophic that sidelines us, but it's just that slow little degrade into illness or long-term problems. Sometimes even though we're perfectly healthy, it's just that slow leak of missing a little bit on our diet or staying away from an active lifestyle one day, and that makes it easier to do it again the next day. And little by little by little, the slow leak takes us farther from health. Sometimes it's a slow leak with our relationships. And we have people with whom we were once super close, and we're good friends, and we love to be around this person, and we talk all the time, but then, we get busy, and they get busy, and we take a little longer to respond to their text, and they take another day to return our calls, and little by little by little, that slow leak in that relationship takes us farther and farther from where we're good friends to where we're now just somebody you used to know. Slow leaks are a part of the human condition. They hit almost every single part of our lives, but we're talking about them today in church because they also impact our morals. And I do a decent amount of counseling when people come in with questions. I've never yet had somebody come in and say, when I started out, when I turned 18 or I turned 21 or when I was a kid, I hoped that someday I'd have a drinking problem. I've never had anybody say that. But I've had people who have drinking problems come into my office. I've never had somebody say, I hope that someday I struggle with materialism and someday I find my whole personal worth is wrapped up in the stuff I own. I've never had somebody say that. I've never had somebody come in and say, I hope that someday I'm completely addicted to pornography. I've never had anybody ask for that. But all of these issues, I've had many people come in and say, I don't know how, but somewhere along the way I got on a path that led me to this place to where now I'm asking, how did I get here? Sometimes it starts with a slow leak. There are these things that wreck our reputations and ruin families and sometimes even cost us our lives, and often their root is something so small. This is a sermon for those who are caught in the middle of a slow leak, but perhaps in many ways it's even more so for those who aren't. Perhaps even most for those who think that this is something that will never happen to you, and that it's something that can't happen to you. I think as human nature, it's tempting to look and say, I would never do that. I would never be part of that. I would never fall into that, when the reality is that happens to all of us. The reason the slow leak is so dangerous is because it often goes unnoticed, at least at first. And for days or weeks or sometimes years, we go down the same path, not even noticing the danger, until our actions have become our habits and our patterns begin to feel unbreakable. And at the root, these leaks would sometimes be manageable when we caught them at the beginning. But when they've gone on long enough, they become a problem of a whole nother level. Now, we're not talking about this today because I want you to go home and be terrified. I don't believe in fear-mongering, especially not in church. We're talking about this today because I believe there's hope. Because I think this is a problem that many of us struggle with in one way or another, but I also believe this is something the Bible gives us something to struggle with, something that is a prescription, a set of actions that can bring us to a place where we can confront the slow leak. It gives us tools so that we might be aware of them and look for them and remove them. It starts in a place that we might not expect. It starts in Luke 22, 14 to 15. When the time came, Jesus took his place at the table, and the apostles joined him, and he said to them, I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. Now, that doesn't seem to solve our problem about the slow leak. We're going to get there, but there's a few minutes of teaching I need to do to put this into context. And so I want to warn you, we're going to go through a couple pieces while we get there. I hope your attention doesn't have too much of a slow leak. But we're going to look at the first 4 words of that passage. When the time came. It's referring to a very specific time. This isn't just a general time. This isn't supper time. This is like Allison talked about. This is the time for Passover. This was a Jewish festival they celebrated every single year, and the date for that time was set way back in the beginning of the Bible. In the third book of the Bible, in Leviticus, we find the date for the Passover. These are the Lord's appointed times, holy occasions, which you will celebrate at their appointed times. The Lord's Passover is on the 14th day of the first month at twilight. The festival of unleavened bread is on the 15th day of the same month. You must eat unleavened bread for 7 days, and on the first day you will hold a holy occasion and must not do any job-related work. This passage is just setting a date for the Jewish festival that happened every single year on the 15th day of the first month of spring. What would have been to them the 15th day of a new year, they would gather together. And every single new year, the second week of the new year, they would stop. And throughout their year, they'd been able to do whatever they wanted, to eat whatever they wanted, but now they would pause and they would celebrate. They would take a break from their normal meals and their business as usual. It was part of breaking up the rhythm of their lives. To get ready, they would go through their pantries and they would take out any bread that had any leaven in it, anything that had yeast, the stuff that makes bread really soft and chewy and delicious. They would remove any of that from their pantries. They would stop work. This practice still actually continues in some places today as a way to remember the rhythm of God as opposed to the rhythm of our world. This is a picture of a grocery store in Jerusalem, an Orthodox grocery store. And you'll see that they've covered up all the bread and all the leavened items during Passover so that no one would accidentally buy anything they weren't supposed to eat. This was part of breaking up their year and remembering God's rhythm. Now, this is similar to our Christian practice of giving up stuff for Lent. Have any of you ever given up anything for Lent? I'm just curious. Okay, about half. Sometimes people choose to give up chocolate or Coke, sweets. Sometimes they give up things like Facebook. Right now, I'm not sure that giving up Facebook is a sacrifice. That actually sounds really nice most days. But this is where we find a tradition rooted in Christian history. This is where we find the roots for our Mardi Gras celebration. Many of you might not realize, but Mardi Gras actually, all current evidence to the contrary, is a Christian day. It comes from the French, seriously. It comes from the French for Fat Tuesday, because Mardi Gras was the day before Lent started, and Mardi Gras was the day that people would eat all of the unhealthy stuff in their cupboard, all the meat and all the sugar and all the butter. They would eat all of that on Tuesday so that it wouldn't be there, so they wouldn't eat it on Wednesday when Lent was happening. So there's actually a name for the practice of giving stuff up. Whether it's bread for the ancient Jews or modern Jews, whether it's cookies and Coke for us. The individual action is called fasting, but the broader category is asceticism, and it's not exactly super popular. This is Margaret Miles. She says, asceticism is the currently least understood and most universally rejected feature of historical Christianity. And I have to agree with her. And so we're going to talk about that least understood and most rejected feature today. See, I don't know about you, but when I think of ascetics, I don't think of them very often. But when I do, I get this image of somebody who's been fasting or not eating for a long period of time, somebody who's intentionally suffering to prove their devotion, somebody who perhaps their skin is stretched too tight and you can count their ribs. Often when we see ascetics in the world, we see people, or we get images of people living on the tops of mountains and there's snow all around, and yet they're wearing far too little clothing to keep warm. Ascetics are people who sometimes suffer to prove their devotion. And I don't think that's the total picture of asceticism. See, sometimes I think we do asceticism wrong, and so we avoid it rather than asceticism itself being wrong. Asceticism isn't supposed to be a competition on how much we can suffer. It's not about how much we can prove our devotion by denying ourselves. The root for asceticism is askesis. It just means exercise. It's a Greek word to talk about the exercises that stretch us and push us, the tools that help us build spiritual muscles we weren't sure we even had. Put differently, asceticism is a way that people would wake up from the normal rhythm of life, that they would take an intentional break from life as it was and business as usual, and for a week or a period of time, reset and start again. To the ancient Jews, the asceticism that came with Passover wasn't just giving up normal food. That was part of it. It wasn't just giving up normal week. That was part two, but it was a week to take a fresh look. It was all about breaking from our habits and remembering that separate of that, God had a cadence for us. They would still eat. They just couldn't eat without thinking about it. And I think that's the point. The thing about asceticism is it makes you think about what you're doing, even the things that you could do without thinking. See, I find in my own life where I run into most of the slow leaks, and I think where most of us do, is the things that we don't have to think about to do. It's the business as usual stuff that we just kind of can go through about half awake on autopilot. It's those places where I'm most in danger, those back of the fridge type locations, where sometimes I don't notice what's going on. The genius of asceticism is that it's one of the best ways to look for these. To find the places where we haven't been paying attention, where we haven't even thought to. Now, me personally, I don't think that we're designed to be super ascetic all the time. Don't hear that I'm telling you have to go live on top of a mountain in the snow in just your underwear. That's not where we're going today. But I do think that there's something here. See, Jesus himself wasn't an ascetic. We were talking in this sermon series about his conversations around a table. He ate big meals, banquets. He drank wine. He spent time with his friends. Jesus was not an ascetic all the time. But I do think, even though we weren't designed to live ascetic lives all the time, that we can all benefit from a bit of asceticism from time to time. I think sometimes there's something valuable in deliberately avoiding comfort. And that's weird. And that's not a common thought, but I think it's one of the best ways to check for the slow leak. Now, here's one of the ways we do that here at church. For the past few weeks, we've been talking about the table and how Jesus took a normal Passover table and helps people understand the different artifacts, the cup and the chalice, the candles, all the different pieces and what they meant for their lives. But today we're going to look at one piece that somewhat fades into the background, and that's the tablecloth. Everything about it is intentional. It seems like it's just decoration, but even its color matters. See these cloths here, and then also the one on the altar and in the image on the side. They're a certain type of cloth. They're called paraments. It's from the Latin parare. It just means to adorn or to prepare. They were a symbol to remind people and prepare them for an encounter with God. They're a physical reminder that our faith, just like every single part of our life, has seasons. Sometimes they're different colors. You might notice that we have red ones, and those come up after Pentecost as we remember that God's Spirit lives in us, and it burns like a fire, and it has the power to change the world. Sometimes they're white, like after Christmas when we remember the purity and the holiness of little baby Jesus. Right now, they're purple because we're in the season of Lent. Purple was the color of royalty. The table and the altar cloths, they reminded people for millennia that sometimes people have used limited segments, small sections of asceticism in their life to wake from their habits, to wake from their cadence, to give up leavened bread, to give up sweets, to give up something as a chance to reset. It's a reminder that Christians have used short bursts to step back. It's a reminder that there is an opposite to the slow leak. So what would it be like to try out intentional asceticism in a small way for the rest of Lent? I was originally going to put this sermon first at the beginning of Lent, which seemed to make sense as we're talking about what Lent is. But I actually chose here intentionally. We're about halfway through Lent. There's actually 20 days left in Lent between now and Easter. I want to challenge you for those 20 days to try a Lent sprint. If you've never tried Lent before, if you've never given something up before, I want to challenge you to try this for 20 days. This is the halfway part. I want to challenge you to try a sprint version of Lent and to give something up, to try and de-acclimate yourself from the normal rhythms that we fall into, to see if a fresh look and a fresh vantage point might bring us back into awareness of some of the things that so often spring loose inside of us. So at the end today, we're going to give you out these lists, and these are some things that people have tried to give up for Lent that might be helpful. I would challenge you to try one of them, but I'll also give you a few here right now. For some people, that might mean giving up 20 days of television. And just to put I know, right? But don't worry, KU's already out of the tournament, so you've got nothing to watch. Yeah, K-State was out a long time ago. Maybe you're going to give up 20 days of TV. And there's a lot of things that we watch and we don't even really pay attention to, but little by little they begin to form how we think. Sometimes the content's not what we really even realize is impacting us until we go 20 days without and realize how much time we spent on that and how much it had sway over us. When I was in middle school, I was challenged to give up lunch during Lent. And so, I'd still eat breakfast, I'd still eat dinner, but throughout the day I'd get hungry, and that was kind of a reminder, it's time to pray. Maybe some of you will give up lunch. I found that, for me personally at least, that was a way that a lot of friends would ask, why are you doing this? And it was a really non-offensive, non-confrontational way to say, hey, there's something that matters to me, and it's more than just food. For some of you, this might mean, and I've had friends do this, giving up makeup and taking a moment to realize how much our self-image comes from our physical image. Typically, it's the females that do that. Guys, that's, I don't know, your call. Maybe you're going to give up the snooze button. In America, we're kind of all about comfort. And the snooze button's one of those really, really easy things to just do again and again and again without noticing. Some of you don't struggle with this. But maybe it's going to be giving up that extra 8 minutes, and you're going to move the alarm clock farther away. And you're going to realize that sometimes comfort becomes our God. Just a thought on this. The one of these that sounds the most impossible is the one I'm going to challenge you to try. I want to challenge you this Lent, or for the rest of it, to try a Lent sprint. Something deliberately uncomfortable. Something that takes us out of our normal, average life. Something that forces us to stop and to think, to redo our rhythms, to break free from our habits, to take a fresh look, to think differently about how we eat, how we entertain ourselves, how we talk to those around us. Sometimes a bit of discomfort breaks us free and allows us to look for those places in our life where we spring slow leaks without even noticing it, without even being aware of it, but those places where we need something to bring our attention back to the front, to bring us back into focus, not so that we'll be uncomfortable forever, but so that we might see our lives as they really are. Now, here's my hope with this. I hope that you'll get done with this and go, that didn't do anything. I hope that you'll get done with this and realize that you had no slow leak in whatever it is that you tried to do. But the reality is, I think for some of us, it brings into sharp focus that maybe there are things that we need to change. Maybe there are slow leaks that we can catch now and have a time to heal. That's my prayer for you this Lent. Let's pray.